The smell of jasmine tea still makes my stomach turn. Not because I dislike it, but because it reminds me of that Tuesday afternoon when everything I thought I knew about my life shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces that I'm still picking up, even now, months later. I'm Marianne, and this is the story of how I discovered that the people closest to you can sometimes be the ones standing furthest away. It started on an ordinary day, the kind where nothing feels particularly special or dangerous. I was at my daughter-in-law's house, watching her move through the kitchen with that careful precision she always had, like every gesture was choreographed for an invisible audience. Celeste. That's her name. She married my son Dominic 7 years ago, and from the very beginning, there was something about her that felt like glass, beautiful to look at but cold to the touch. I was arranging flowers in a vase near the window when I heard her voice drift in from the hallway. She was talking to someone, her tone light and casual. The way you talk when you think no one important is listening. Just make sure it's her cup, she said, the one with the tiny chip on the handle. She'll be drowsing before we even serve the main course. I can't deal with her commentary tonight. I froze. My hands were still in the water, a stem of lavender between my fingers. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there as her words settled into my chest like stones. Then I heard Dominic's voice, muffled, uncertain. I couldn't make out his words, but I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when he was a boy and got caught doing something he knew was wrong but didn't want to admit. Celeste laughed, soft and unbothered. Relax. It's harmless. Just a little something to help her relax. We deserve one peaceful evening without her turning everything into a lecture. I looked at myself in the mirror hanging above the sideboard. My reflection stared back, calm and hollow. I didn't look shocked. I looked like I'd been expecting this for years and just hadn't wanted to name it. They were talking about drugging me, my own son and his wife, because I was inconvenient. I walked into the dining room slowly, counting my steps, 12 in total. Celeste was setting the table, her smile bright and empty. Dominic stood beside her, adjusting a napkin like it mattered. Marianne, Celeste said warmly, as if she hadn't just been plotting to put me to sleep like an unruly pet. You look lovely. That scarf really brings out your eyes. I smiled back, didn't say a word, just picked up the cup she'd set at my place, the one with the tiny chip on the handle, and carried it to the kitchen. I poured it out, rinsed it carefully, and filled it with fresh water. Then I walked back and set it down at her seat. Hers for mine, mine for hers. No one noticed. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The dinner started like any other. Celeste's parents arrived first, her mother draped in pearls and that permanent expression of mild disapproval. Then came my granddaughter, Lucia, sweet and distracted, always glancing at her phone. My grandson Marcus showed up last, mumbling apologies about traffic. The table filled, candles flickered, Celeste made a toast. To family, she said, lifting her glass. To patience and to keeping things harmonious. There was an awkward pause, a few polite chuckles. Dominic looked uncomfortable. I just watched. She drank. I saw her throat move as she swallowed. Then I lifted my own glass and held it in the air for a moment, before setting it back down. Untouched. The meal began. Conversations floated around me. Work, school, someone's upcoming trip to the coast. Celeste kept glancing at me, waiting, I think, for me to start fading, for my words to slur, for my head to droop. But I was fine. She, however, was not. About 20 minutes in, she started blinking more than usual, rubbed her temple, reached for her water glass and drank deeply. Are you feeling all right, dear? I asked, my voice gentle, almost motherly. Fine, she muttered, but her words were already starting to blur at the edges. 10 more minutes and she was pale. Her fork clattered against her plate. She tried to stand, swayed, and sat back down hard. Celeste, Dominic said, his voice tight with confusion. She slumped sideways in her chair. Marcus jumped up. Lucia gasped. Dominic just stood there, frozen, staring at his wife like she'd turned into someone he didn't recognize. I rose slowly, picked up her glass, and walked it to the kitchen. Poured the rest down the drain. Wiped the rim clean. Set it on the counter like it had never held anything but water. They called an ambulance. The medics came, asked questions, checked her pulse, her pupils. Someone mentioned exhaustion, low blood sugar, stress. No one asked what was in the glass, and I said nothing. He stood in the doorway, looking lost, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "You should rest too," I said. He nodded but didn't move. "I heard you," I added quietly. He went completely still. Then he turned and walked out into the night. I closed the door and stood there in the silence. It felt different than it had before. Not empty, just full of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Clarity. I cleaned up the dishes, wiped down the table, folded the napkins. Everything in its place. The roast had gone cold, but no one had eaten much anyway. Lucia had folded her napkin into a perfect triangle before she left. I hoped she'd keep it. In the kitchen, I scrubbed each plate slowly, methodically. The water ran hot over my hands, and I watched the soap bubble and disappear down the drain, carrying with it the residue of a night that had changed everything. But it hadn't started tonight. It had started years ago. In small moments I'd convinced myself didn't matter. Celeste had always disliked me. At first, it was subtle. Little corrections about pronunciation. "It's bruschetta, Marianne, not bruschetta." Or comments about my clothes. "That's a very nostalgic style, very retro." Retro meant outdated. Nostalgic meant embarrassing. Then came the bigger things. The unsolicited advice about how I was too involved in Lucia's life, how I needed to respect boundaries. How my decorating style was charming, but perhaps a bit much for modern tastes. She came from money, not old money, the kind that whispers. New money, the kind that shouts. Designer handbags, spa memberships, a car that cost more than my entire house. And yet, somehow, they were always struggling. That's where I came in. I helped with the down payment on their house, covered private school tuition when Marcus started struggling, paid off credit card debt they'd racked up on things I never saw. I did it quietly, because that's what mothers do. That's what I told myself. But they got comfortable, started treating my help like an expectation, like I owed them just for existing. And Dominic, my sweet boy who used to hold my hand at the grocery store and tell me I was the best mom in the world, stopped seeing me. "She doesn't mean it like that, Mom. You're being too sensitive." I wasn't being sensitive. I was being erased. I finished the dishes and turned off the kitchen light. Walked upstairs and got into bed, but I didn't sleep. My mind replayed the conversation I'd overheard, her voice so sure, so careless, talking about me like I was a problem to be managed. I used to stay quiet because I thought silence was strength, that enduring meant loving, that good mothers don't make waves. But I was done staying quiet. The next morning I dressed carefully. A soft blouse, my favorite cardigan, the pearl earrings my late husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the light change across the garden. My phone buzzed just after 9. A message from Lucia. "Grandma, are you okay? Last night was so strange. Dad said Celeste fainted because she hadn't eaten all day, but something felt off. Are you all right?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Thank you for checking." "Yes, something was strange. We'll talk soon." I didn't say more, not yet. She deserved the truth, but not in a text message. I spent the rest of the morning going through my bank statements. 3 accounts, savings, checking, and one I hadn't touched in over a year. My name on all of them. Dominic's name on several. I'd forgotten how many automatic payments I'd set up for them. Cell phones, car insurance, gym memberships, streaming services, school fees. It was all there in black and white. A paper trail of generosity that had turned into dependency. I closed the laptop and picked up the phone. The woman who answered was young and cheerful. Too cheerful for 9:30 in the morning. "Good morning. This is Brielle at Westside Community Bank. How can I assist you today?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "Yes, hello. I need to review the automatic transfers on my accounts. I'd like to suspend all of them. There was a pause. Of course, Mrs. Marianne. Let me pull up your account. Can I verify your identity first? We went through the usual questions. Social security number. Maiden name. Security question I'd set years ago and barely remembered. Perfect, Brielle said. I see you have several recurring payments scheduled. Would you like to cancel specific ones, or would you prefer a blanket suspension? All of them, I said. My voice didn't shake. I had expected it to, but it came out clear and firm. Understood. I'm processing that now. All scheduled payments will be suspended immediately. You'll receive a confirmation email within the hour. I thanked her and hung up. And just like that, the financial thread connecting me to their lives was cut. I made myself lunch. Nothing fancy, just a sandwich and some fruit. I took it out to the porch and sat in the wicker chair that Celeste always wrinkled her nose at. Funny how that chair had outlasted her politeness. The air was warm. Early autumn always felt heavy here, like the world was holding its breath before the change. I thought about my husband, Robert. If he were still here, he would have seen this coming. He'd warned me years ago, gently, the way he always did. Marianne, he'd said once, if they only come around when they need something, they're not visiting you, they're visiting your wallet. I brushed him off, told him he was being cynical. But he wasn't cynical. He was tired of watching me give pieces of myself away to people who never said thank you. Around 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Dominic stood there, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He looked like a man who'd been scrambling for answers all day and still hadn't found any. Mom, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I need to ask you something. I didn't invite him to sit. Just stood there, waiting. Did you do something with the bank? I did. Why? I looked at him for a long moment. You know why. His face shifted. Confusion, irritation, something else I couldn't name. Mom, Celeste has been under a lot of stress. She didn't mean anything by what she said. It was just poor wording. Poor wording, I repeated. She didn't drug you, he said quickly. You're jumping to conclusions. It was just a supplement. She thought it might help you relax. She put it in my drink without telling me. Yes. Okay, that part wasn't great. I almost laughed. Not great. He exhaled, rubbing his face. Look, I'm not saying it was the right call, but we both thought, that sometimes these dinners get tense. You know how you can be. How I can be, I said slowly. You make comments, Mom, about her, about the house, about the kids. I paid for the house, I interrupted. I paid the down payment. I've been paying the mortgage for 6 years. I paid for the kids' school, your insurance, Celeste's medical bills. I paid for groceries when your credit card got declined last spring. He opened his mouth, closed it. So if I made a few comments over dinner, I continued, I think I earned that right. Silence. You took my money, I said quietly, and in return, you tried to put me to sleep like an inconvenient child. It wasn't like that. Was it your idea? I asked. Or did you just stay quiet and let her do it? He didn't answer. From the kitchen, the kettle started to whistle. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. I poured myself tea, sat at the table, and waited. He didn't follow. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. I used to think silence was noble, that swallowing hurt was strength, that good mothers endure, forgive, stay quiet. I don't think that anymore. The next day, I opened the drawer in the hallway console, the one I hadn't looked in for years. Inside were files, old receipts, warranties for appliances I no longer owned, and a thick envelope with Dominic's name written across it in my handwriting. I emptied it onto the kitchen table. Copies of checks, receipts, loan agreements that were never repaid, birthday cards with thank yous scribbled next to amounts that shouldn't have been gifts at all. 17 years of trying to buy my place in a family that had slowly decided I was optional. One check for $7,200, labeled Mercery Furniture. That was when Celeste was pregnant with Marcus. She'd cried on the phone, said she didn't want her baby sleeping in secondhand junk. I'd wired the money that same day. Another for $15,000. Bridge loan until bonus comes through. The bonus never came. And the biggest one, $53,000, Down payment on house. They'd had champagne that night. Dominic sent me a photo of the cork with a message that said, "Couldn't have done this without you, Mom." I didn't print that photo. It wasn't just the money. It was the small things, the corrections in front of others. The way Celeste would say, "Marianne, I think you meant to say seasonal, not just fallish." The way Dominic would laugh like it was charming. They never hit me, never yelled, just chipped away, slow and soft, until I started doubting my own worth. So I stayed quiet. When Marcus forgot my birthday, I said nothing. When Lucia's recital went by without an invitation, I pretended I hadn't heard about it. When Celeste planned holidays without asking if I'd be free, I made other plans, alone, because it was easier than making a scene. Because I thought they'd come around. They didn't. I pulled out a fresh notepad and began writing. Not a letter, a list. Payments, dates, patterns. At the bottom, I wrote one sentence. A person's worth is not measured by what they give, but by how they're treated when they stop giving. Then I picked up the phone and called Lucia. She answered on the second ring. "Grandma?" Her voice was cautious. That hurt more than anything. "Hi, sweetheart. You asked me yesterday if everything was okay." "Yeah, you seem different. I need to tell you something, but not over the phone. Can you come by after school? Do you want me to bring anything? Just yourself." She came that afternoon, walked in quietly, respectfully, her backpack slung over one shoulder. We sat at the table. I didn't offer snacks, didn't ask about school. I just told her the truth. About the glass. About what I heard. About what I did. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "She's been weird with you for years." That surprised me. "I noticed when I was 10, Lucia continued. "I remember you gave me a sweater for Christmas, and she said it wasn't my style. Dad just let her." I nodded slowly. Lucia looked at me, then down at her hands. "Are you okay?" "I am now. I'm sorry." "You don't need to be. You didn't do any of it." She took a breath. "What happens now?" "I'm not sure," I said. "But it's going to be different." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to Dominic. To my lawyer. I asked for an appointment. And for the first time in months, I slept well. The law office smelled like old wood and paper. A sterile sort of calm that made you sit up straighter without anyone asking. I hadn't been there in years. Not since I updated my will after Robert died. Who else was there? Now, I was here for a different reason. The receptionist smiled politely, offered tea. I declined. "Mrs. Marianne, Mr. Grayson will see you now." Elliot Grayson was nearing 70 himself. Thin, sharp-eyed, hands steady as a surgeon's. He'd been my lawyer for decades. Not a friend, but familiar in the way small-town professionals often are. "Marianne," he said warmly, rising as I entered. "It's been a while. Too long. I need to make some changes." He nodded, gestured to the chair. "Tell me what you're thinking." I laid out the facts, slowly. He listened, only nodding occasionally, scribbling notes with a fountain pen. When I got to the part about the wine glass, he set the pen down and looked at me over his glasses. "Do you want to press charges?" "No." He didn't ask why. Instead, he pulled out my last will, flipped to the second page. "Currently, Dominic is the sole beneficiary. You're listed as executor, and you've designated him power of attorney if you become incapacitated. Do you want to remove him from all of that?" "Yes, and replace him with my granddaughter, Lucia." He didn't blink, just made a note. "I'd also like to create a trust," I said. "A separate account for Lucia's education, housing, her future. Something no one else can touch. Not her parents, not her brother, not even me once it's set." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "That can be done. I'd suggest a revocable living trust with a named successor trustee, preferably someone outside the family." "Can you be that person?" He smiled faintly. "I'd be happy to, but I'll need to verify with Lucia first that she understands what's being offered. She doesn't know yet. Not the details. She will soon." It took 2 hours, signing, initialing, reviewing clause after clause. I felt no hesitation, just a calm sense of direction. When it was done, I felt lighter. Not euphoric, just unburdened. Outside, the sun had shifted westward. The light was softer. I stopped, by the bakery on the way home and bought a lemon tart, Lucia's favorite. The next morning, Dominic called. I didn't pick up. A few minutes later, a message came through. I just got a notification from the mortgage company. Payment bounced. What's going on? Can you call me back? I stared at the screen, then set the phone down and went to water my plants. Let him sit in the silence for a while. I'd lived in his for years. Later that afternoon, Lucia came by again. This time she had a stack of school papers and a worried look in her eyes. I think Dad's starting to freak out, she said, dropping into the kitchen chair. He should have thought about that before letting Celeste put something in my drink. Lucia winced. He says it wasn't like that. I know what I heard. I believe you. I sat across from her and slid the tart across the table. Lemon, I remembered. She smiled, that same soft, grateful smile I used to get from Dominic when he was young. Before the distance, before the expectations. I made a decision, I said. I changed my will. Her eyes widened. You what? I took your father out, removed him as beneficiary, executor, power of attorney. I named you instead. Me? Yes. And I set up a trust for your future. Grandma, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Just promise me something. Anything. Don't ever let people mistake your kindness for permission. Lucia nodded. Her eyes were glassy. I didn't do this to punish them, I said. I did it because I want what I built to go to someone who sees me, not just what I can give. I do see you, she whispered. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone's mother again, not because of what I could provide, but because I was finally being heard. A pale envelope with Dominic's name in bold type, but my address listed as billing source. I opened it out of habit more than concern. Past due, mortgage, insurance. One bounced, one suspended. I set the letter on the counter and made myself tea. It wasn't my problem anymore. Later that afternoon, the bank called to confirm the final closure of all recurring transfers. A pleasant woman named Kendra read the list back to me. Cell plans, utilities, tuition support, 2 gym memberships, something labeled Executive Wellness Monthly. All canceled, she said. Would you like printed copies for your records? Yes, please. And could you send them to my attorney as well? Elliot Grayson. Absolutely. That was that. No ceremony. Just a phone call and a quiet erasing of financial strings I'd tied myself up in for nearly 2 decades. The silence after felt whole. I didn't realize how much noise I'd been living with. Not just the literal noise of texts and calls and requests, but the mental weight. The invisible math of being generous. Of calculating what wouldn't cause a fight. What would earn me just enough inclusion to not feel erased. They used to make it sound like I was doing it out of obligation. You're always so generous, Mom, Dominic would say with that gentle tone that now felt like sandpaper. Yes, I had been generous, but I'd also learned to mistake help for currency, a trade for a place at the table. Not anymore. By the weekend, I began rearranging the house, slowly, deliberately. Not redecorating, just reclaiming. I took down the stiff gray curtains Celeste once insisted were more modern. I put the floral ones back up, the ones she'd rolled her eyes at. I liked them. They reminded me of mornings when Robert was alive, making coffee while I tied back the sashes. I packed up a shelf of gifts they'd given me over the years. Mostly things that came with passive-aggressive notes. A book on updating your personal style, a blender I never used, a necklace too bold for my taste. I put them in a box, labeled it donation, and set it by the door. I was clearing space, literally and otherwise. Monday, Lucia came over again after school. She found me sitting on the floor in the living room, surrounded by old photo albums. I hadn't looked at them in years. It had always felt too heavy. She sat beside me without asking. I found some, I said, holding up a page with Dominic at 6, beaming next to a sandcastle. Lucia smiled. He looks like Marcus. He used to laugh so loud, people turned around in restaurants. Lucia traced the edge of the photo. What happened? I shook my head. I don't know the exact day it changed. It wasn't dramatic. Just slow. He got older, got smarter, met Celeste. Things started getting small between us. tighter, like he was shrinking away from who we were. He shouldn't have let her treat you like that, Lucia said quietly. No, I agreed. But I let it happen too. I wanted peace more than I wanted truth. We flipped through a few more pages. Birthdays, holidays. One picture of me holding baby Lucia in a hospital chair, my eyes puffy from crying. I remembered that day. She'd come early. I'd held her all night while Celeste slept. Lucy looked at it for a long time. I don't remember that. You were just a few hours old. She hesitated. Do you ever think about cutting him off completely? Like not talking to him at all? I think about it, I said. But I'm not sure it's about punishment anymore. It's about peace. If he can be in my life without demanding anything from me, I'm open to that. But I won't pay for love anymore. That chapter's over. Lucy didn't say anything, just leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. After she left, I got a call from a blocked number. I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail. Celeste. Her voice sounded strained, forced. Too sweet by half. Marianne, I think we should talk. There have been some misunderstandings. Dominic told me you've been feeling hurt. That's really unfortunate. I think we could all benefit from clearing the air. Maybe we could do lunch? I replayed the message once, just to hear the way she said, unfortunate. As if my feelings were a scheduling conflict. I didn't call back. Not because I was angry, but because I knew what that lunch would be. A performance. An apology laced with conditions. A plea for restoring balance. What she really wanted was access. Access to me, to my money, to my silence. She could keep waiting. That evening, I sat by the window with a blanket and watched the sun dip behind the trees. The porch light clicked on automatically. A soft yellow glow over the chair I'd reclaimed, the one with the peeling armrest. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a call. I wasn't hoping to be included. I wasn't adjusting myself to fit inside someone else's version of family. I was simply home. And it was enough. The first message from Marcus came the next morning. It was short, stiff, polite. Like he was writing to a teacher he didn't really like. Hey, Grandma, Dad said you're mad at everyone. Just wanted to say I hope you're okay. I stared at it for a while. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't curious either. No question, no real concern. Just a vague hope that whatever disruption I'd caused would resolve itself. He'd always been like that, hands off. But trained early to keep a safe distance from discomfort. I didn't answer. An hour later, Lucia called. Marcus just texted me. He said you're mad at everyone. I'm not mad, I replied. I'm done. There was silence on the line, then a soft laugh. Good. Lucia had been checking in every day now. Not out of obligation, just being there. Sometimes she came over. Sometimes she called. Once she dropped off a bag of oranges because she said I made the best marmalade and she was tired of the store-bought kind. I didn't realize how thirsty I'd been for that kind of attention. Simple, quiet, undemanding. That same afternoon, another message came in. This one from Dominic. Can we talk? Not about money. Just talk. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the phone and went out to the garden. The weeds had gotten bold while I was busy handling everyone else's life. I dug in with my hands, pulled root after root, clearing space for air and sun. It felt good. Honest, messy, real. That evening, I baked bread. The house filled with warmth and the smell of something rising. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. The slow miracle of flour and water becoming something alive again. I sat by the window with a slice, still warm. No butter. Just salt. The porch light flicked on. I didn't look at my phone. When it rang again after dark, I let it go to voicemail. That one surprised me. Marianne, this is Vivienne. I know things have been tense lately, but I wanted to say I never meant for you to feel excluded. I assumed Dominic and Celeste were involving you in plans. If I had known, well, I just wanted to reach out. For what it's worth, I always admired how you carried yourself. I didn't know what to make of that. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she just heard about the canceled payments. Either way, it didn't change anything. The next day, the florist delivered a bouquet of white orchids. No note, just a typed card. Thinking of you. I snorted. There wasn't an orchid in the world that could undo what had been done. I gave the flowers to Mrs. Caldwell next door. Her husband had passed last week. At least, she'd appreciate them. Later that week, I made an appointment at a different credit union. Not the same bank Dominic used. I wanted a clean break. A young woman helped me set up separate accounts. One for Lucia's trust, one just for me. My name only. No shared access. No cosigners. No just in case. When she asked if I wanted to link any family members for emergency contact, I shook my head. I've already had that emergency, I said. I handled it. Back home, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. Lucia, she'd written me a real letter, on lined paper. Her handwriting was neat, loopy, like mine had once been. How Dominic was quieter than usual. How Celeste pretended nothing had happened. How Marcus kept asking if I was coming over for Sunday dinner. They don't get it, she wrote. They think you're being dramatic or difficult. But I see what's happening. You're setting a boundary, and I respect it. Then one sentence I read twice. You taught me how to bake, but now you're teaching me how to have a backbone. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where I kept Robert's watch, an old church program, and the only photo I still displayed of Dominic as a boy. The next day, I walked to the post office and bought a box of stationery. If they were going to start writing, I'd respond in kind, but only to the ones who wrote with truth. Not orchids, not voicemails, not polite lies hidden in expensive paper. Words, honest ones. I wrote Lucia back that evening. No advice, no preaching. Just told her about the bread, about the orchids, about the garden finally getting its space again. And I ended with this. Kindness is a gift, sweetheart, but it's not a contract. Never forget the difference. I sealed the letter and smiled. Let the silence stretch on if it wanted. I was no longer afraid of it. The letter from Dominic arrived on a Thursday. Not an email, not a text. A real envelope, my name in his handwriting. Careful. Almost too neat. Like he'd taken his time. Like he wanted the effort to show. I let it sit on the table while I boiled water for tea, sorted the laundry, refolded the kitchen towels. I moved around it, aware of it in the way you're aware of a sore tooth. Not painful, but persistent. When I finally slid it open, I braced for excuses. But it wasn't that. It started with a sentence I hadn't seen from him in years. Mom, I'm sorry. No qualifiers, no spin. Just that. He went on. Said he hadn't realized how much he'd relied on me. How easy it had become to let Celeste run the show while he stayed neutral. He admitted that he'd hurt her that night in the dining room. That he'd been too afraid to stop her. I knew what she meant, and I didn't stop her. I thought it would keep things smooth. I see now what that says about me. He didn't ask for money, he didn't mention the canceled payments. Instead, he wrote about memories, how I used to sing while doing the dishes, how he'd wake up to the smell of coffee and humming, how I'd made his favorite soup when he had the flu, and sat by his bed reading the same book over and over until he fell asleep. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person, and started seeing you as a function, a role, a resource. I hate that it took something so ugly for me to realize it. At the end, he asked nothing. He just said he hoped I was okay, that he was trying to understand what came next, that he wanted to earn the right to be in my life again if I'd let him. I folded the letter slowly, set it aside. I didn't know how I felt. I'd spent so long waiting for that kind of apology that now, having it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. It didn't erase anything. It didn't make what happened better. But it was something, and maybe it wasn't for me to decide right then what came of it. Later that day, I went into town to see Elliot Grayson. The documents for the trust were ready for final signatures. He greeted me with his usual quiet smile. We sat in his office, the thick file between us, and went over everything one more time. The trust is fully funded, he said, adjusting his glasses. Disbursement begins when Lucia turns 25, with provisions for education and housing before that if needed. All conditions are locked. Only she can access the funds. No cosigners. No transfers. I nodded. She'll be protected. You did this right, he added. She deserves it. Elliot hesitated, then added gently, I've worked with a lot of families over the years, Marianne. Most people don't do this. Not unless there's a lot of anger behind it. There was, I said, but not anymore. Not exactly. He didn't press. I signed the last document, just a name on a line, but it felt like sealing a chapter. On the way out, I stopped by the bakery and picked up 2 pastries. One for me, one for Lucia. I didn't know if she'd be by that day, but it felt right. I got home just as the mail truck rolled up. Another envelope. This one from Celeste. I nearly tossed it in the trash without opening it. But I didn't. It was 1 page. Printed, not handwritten. Polite, cold. She wrote that she hoped I was well, that she regretted how things had been perceived, and that she wanted to rebuild bridges. She asked to meet for lunch, her treat, at one of those modern places she loved, where everything was plated on stone and tasted like salt and air. There was no apology, only optics. I folded the letter once and slid it into the drawer where I kept coupons and spare batteries, a waiting room for things I didn't know what to do with yet.
At evening, Lucia came by.
I handed her the pastry and told her the trust was official. She stared at me. What does that mean? She asked. It means no one can take your future from you, I said. Not even you if you're being foolish. She laughed, then paused. Is it a lot? It's enough. She didn't ask for numbers. I liked that about her. We sat on the porch eating, watching the last light leave the sky. Dad wrote me a letter, I said eventually. She looked over. And? I believe he means it. But believing someone's regret doesn't mean you hand them a key again. She nodded. Do you think you'll forgive him? But that doesn't mean I'm letting him back in the house. Lucia didn't argue. We finished our pastries in silence, the kind that doesn't ache. That night I slept with the window open. The air was cooler now. Autumn was shifting. The kind of fall I liked. Not curated, just plain, honest weather. I woke up once around midnight and stood by the window. The street was empty. No cars, no footsteps, just the hum of quiet houses. Mine no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt like a home again. I wasn't expecting them to show up at my door. Not like that. The kind of day where the air hangs heavy and still just before a storm. I'd been out in the backyard pulling weeds from the far corner of the garden when I heard the car. I knew the engine before I saw it. Dominic's sedan. Always a little too clean. Always parked just a little too straight. I stood up, wiped my hands on my pants, and watched them get out. Both of them. Dominic looked tired, older than I remembered, but it was Celeste who caught my eye. Dressed down, hair pulled back, no makeup, which was rare for her. She always presented herself like she expected a camera to appear at any moment. But today, she looked normal, small, almost. I didn't move. Dominic lifted a hand in a little wave. Can we talk? I didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the porch. If they wanted a conversation, they could have it on my ground. They followed me up the steps like children, unsure if they were still in trouble. I didn't offer chairs, didn't invite them in. Celeste spoke first. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see. You're not wrong, I said. She swallowed. I came to say something, and not just because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said we weren't affected. I waited. She glanced at Dominic, who gave her a small nod. I'm sorry, she said. For everything, the dinner, the glass, I shouldn't have done that. I was trying to control a situation that wasn't mine to control. It was selfish and wrong. Her voice was flat, practiced, not robotic, but careful, like someone trying to walk across ice without slipping. I didn't speak. I wasn't raised to ask for help, she continued, and when you kept giving it, money, time, space, I told myself it was just your way of being. I didn't think about what it cost you. I didn't want to. Still, I said nothing. Dominic stepped forward. We came because we know we can't undo it, but we don't want to pretend anymore. I don't. I looked at them both for a long time. Then I said, I've already forgiven you. They blinked. But forgiveness doesn't come with a seat at my table. Not yet. Dominic nodded slowly. I understand. Celeste, to her credit, didn't argue. I spent a long time thinking I could earn love with usefulness, I said. That if I just stayed helpful, no one would throw me away. They shifted, uncomfortable. I'm not angry anymore, I added, but I'm not available either. That seemed to land. Is there anything we can do? I thought about that. You can stop trying to manage the narrative. Don't tell the kids I'm being difficult. Don't play the victim. Just say the truth. I set boundaries you didn't like. He nodded. And I added, you can live with the consequences. If money is tight, figure it out. You're grown people. You have jobs, a house, a car I helped you buy. Figure it out like I had to when I was 35 and widowed. Celeste's face twitched just a little. I wasn't sure if it was shame or pride trying to stay intact. That's fair, Dominic said quietly. I stepped back toward the door. If you want to visit again, write first. No unannounced appearances. No requests. No strings. They both murmured agreement. I didn't hug them, didn't reach out, just nodded and stepped inside, closing the screen door behind me. I watched through the curtain as they got back into the car. No fight, no dramatics. Just two people finally realizing they'd lost access to something they thought was permanent. The next morning, Lucia stopped by. I told her they'd come. What did you say? She asked. The truth. Lucia smiled faintly. I bet that rattled them. They'll survive, I said. We all do. She looked around the living room. It's so quiet here now. It tells me when someone's voice matters. That afternoon, I sat down with a new notepad. I started a list, not of payments, but of things I wanted. Small things. Take a pottery class. Visit the Arboretum in Ashford. Find my old recipe for lemon bars, and see if it's still as good as I remember. I hadn't made a list like that in years. I always made lists for others. Shopping, bills, gifts, favors. This one was mine, and it felt like a beginning. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, like light under a closed door. That's how it felt the morning after they came. I woke up before the sun. No alarm, no reason. Body rested. I got up, made coffee the old-fashioned way, and sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The street was still asleep. No cars, no sprinklers, no barking dogs. Just stillness, and me in it. Not as an intruder, not as a prop, but as the owner of my own time. I watched the light grow inch by inch across the yard. Pale at first, then gold. The kind of morning you notice more when you're not distracted by what others need from you. I wasn't weak. I was patient. That's the part no one understood. They thought my silence meant agreement, that my quiet was consent. But it wasn't. It was endurance. It was a long-held breath. And now I was exhaling. Fully. After breakfast, I cleaned out the hallway closet. Not out of necessity, just because I wanted the space. I found coats that didn't fit, board games no one played, a pair of shoes Dominic gave me years ago that pinched my toes but looked appropriate for formal events. Into the donation bag they went. I kept one thing, though, an old sweater with fraying sleeves, Robert's. It still smelled faintly of cedar and something warm I could never name. I held it for a moment, then folded it neatly and set it on the bed. Some things you keep, but for memory. Around noon, Lucia called. You sound good, she said, halfway surprised. I feel good. Did they say anything after they left? No, I said, and that's just fine. I didn't need follow-ups. I didn't need explanations. They'd had their moment. I'd had mine. The rest would take care of itself. That part wasn't up to me anymore. After we hung up, I drove to the nursery. Bought herbs for the garden. Basil, thyme, lavender. Simple things. But I'd neglected that corner of my life for too long. I wanted to grow something that didn't require apology. Back home, I spent the afternoon planting. Hands in the dirt, sun on my back. The kind of quiet work that makes you forget you ever worried about things like bank statements or strange smiles over roast beef. The phone rang once. Dominic again. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message this time. That, I decided, was progress. Later, I opened the drawer where I'd kept his letter. reread it. Still honest, still painful, but less sharp now, like a wound that had scabbed over. I put it back, then picked up the letter Lucia wrote and read that again, too. I found myself smiling at the line about the backbone. She was growing one, too, and that mattered more than anything else. That night, I cooked for myself. Not leftovers, not something frozen, real food. Fresh pasta with tomatoes and garlic and a little too much olive oil. I ate it slowly at the table, with music playing low from the kitchen radio. No one interrupted. No one asked for seconds. No one picked at the food or said it was a bit heavy. Living. It struck me mid-bite how rare that had become. For years I'd been a provider, a buffer, a quiet shadow in the background of someone else's life. The dependable one, the helper, the bank. Now I was just a woman with a plate of pasta, a glass of wine, and a house that no longer echoed with quiet resentment. I thought back to that night, the dinner, the glass, the slow collapse of pretense. I remembered Celeste's face just before she slumped. Dominic's panic, my own calm. How still I'd been, not vengeful, not angry, just done. Some people need drama to end a story. I needed stillness. And my return. I went to bed early that night, not out of exhaustion, but because I could. Because no one needed me to stay up to answer questions or transfer money or listen to complaints about other people's choices. Because peace, when it finally comes, asks nothing of you except presence. And I was fully present, for once, in my own life. When I turned off the light, I thought to myself, almost absently, they thought I was weak. But I was patient, and I was right. 2 weeks passed without a word. No texts, no visits, no apologies wrapped in flowers or guilt disguised as concern. And it was the most peace I'd had in years. Things I used to rush through or put off. I repainted the back door, organized the pantry, even stitched a tear in the living room curtain I'd ignored for nearly a decade. Not because any of it mattered, really, but because it was mine to tend to. Without supervision, without commentary, without being told there was a better way to do it. That was the difference. I wasn't being watched anymore. When you live with people, or even just near them, who think they know better than you, everything becomes performative. Every choice you make is up for quiet debate. Even silence starts to feel like judgment. But now the quiet felt like breath. One morning, I made pancakes, just for myself. Not for guests. Just because I wanted them. I made them the way I liked. Crisp edges, too much butter, a little lemon in the batter. I sat by the window, watching the sun move across the kitchen tile, and thought, this is what a second life feels like. That afternoon, I took out my recipe box. The old one, wood chipped in the corners, the cards inside smudged with flour and oil from years of use. I hadn't touched it in ages. Celeste didn't care for my recipes. Said they were too heavy, too dated. Once, she even asked if I could try cooking with less emotion. Whatever that meant. But Lucia had asked me once, years ago, if I'd write them all down for her someday. So I began, one card at a time. Not just the ingredients, the stories too, where the recipe came from, who loved it most, when it was usually made. Not for anyone's approval, just so that someday, someone would open this box and hear my voice in their kitchen. That evening, Lucia called. They're quiet, she said, meaning her parents. Good, I replied. I think they're waiting to see if you'll come around. I laughed softly, let them wait. Then, you're really not angry anymore, are you? No, I said. Anger's a fire. It needs oxygen. I stopped feeding it. What's left? Space, I said. And silence, and peace. She liked that. We talked a little longer, about school, her friends, the new book she was reading. No heavy subjects, just a real conversation, one that didn't circle back to guilt or negotiation. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about legacy. Not the money, not the house, not even the trust, but the feeling I was leaving behind. What would they remember? Would they say I was kind, strong, distant, cold? Maybe all of it. But I hoped, most of all, they'd remember I stopped letting myself be used. That I found the line where giving becomes losing. And I stepped back. The next day, I went to the library, checked out 3 books I'd always meant to read but never had time for. When I walked out, the sun was high and the breeze felt like a small reward. At home, I started another letter to Lucia. Not about the trust this time, not about Dominic, just about life. I told her about the books, the pancakes, the recipe box. I told her I was thinking about starting a new flower bed in the front yard. Unkempt. I ended it with this. Don't wait for someone else to tell you your life has value. Decide it does, and then live like it. I sealed the envelope, added a stamp with a little butterfly on it. Cheerful, busy, unbothered. And as I walked it out to the mailbox, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. It rained for 3 days straight, not the loud kind. Not thunder and flash and drama, but the soft, soaking kind that makes everything slow down. The kind of rain that seems to wash more than just the streets. I spent most of those days inside, reading, writing, moving from room to room with no real urgency. There was something comforting about hearing the water on the windows, knowing the world outside was doing its own quiet work of renewal. I didn't hear from Dominic or Celeste, and I didn't wonder why. On the second night, I sat down with a pad of paper and started something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a list of people I hadn't spoken to in a long time. People I'd let drift away because I was too busy being needed by the ones who didn't value me. Friends I'd stopped calling because Celeste didn't like them. Neighbors I waved to but never invited in. Even my cousin Helena, who lived 2 towns over and had always sent me a card on my birthday, even after I forgot hers twice. I decided to write them. Not to apologize, just to reconnect. That's what I was learning. Freedom isn't always about cutting ties. Sometimes it's about retying the ones that mattered, the ones you let fray while holding up the wrong end of someone else's rope. I started with Helena. Dear Helena, I wrote, I've been quiet for too long, not because I didn't care, but because I forgot I was allowed to have a life of my own. It felt good. The next morning I received a delivery. Not flowers. Not guilt gifts. A basket. Inside, honey, tea, a jar of homemade jam, and a folded note. Lucia. She wrote that she'd made the jam herself. Strawberries from a neighbor's garden. That she thought of me when she tasted it because it was a little tart, a little sweet, and totally itself. I smiled at that. She added one more thing at the bottom of the note, almost like a whisper. You're the kind of woman I want to become. I sat with that sentence for a long time, not because it flattered me, but because it reminded me that nothing I'd built was wasted. Not the meals, not the patience, not even the mistakes. It had reached someone. It had shaped someone, and that mattered. That same day, I finally opened the drawer with Celeste's letter. The one I'd tucked away weeks ago. I didn't reread it, just took it out, walked it to the fire pit in the backyard, and lit a match. It burned quickly. No resistance. Sometimes closure isn't a door slamming, it's just deciding not to carry something anymore. That evening, I sat by the window again, tea warm in my hands, and watched the rain slow to a stop. But I didn't mind. It needed the soak. Things grow better when the soil's been softened first, just like people. The next day, I went to the nursery again. This time I bought wildflower seeds, the kind that bloom where they want, how they want. No order, no pruning, just color and stubbornness. I came home, put on my gloves, and scattered them in the front yard. Let them surprise me, I thought. I didn't need control. I needed life. And life, I was learning, was best lived uncontained. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting the apology to fix anything. That's the thing about clarity. Once it arrives, it doesn't need ceremony. It doesn't ask for a stage. It just settles in quietly, like a truth you already knew but didn't want to speak aloud. One morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Dominic or Celeste in 3 whole days. Not once. Not when I cooked. Not even when I passed the corner of the kitchen where Celeste used to leave her purse every time they visited. That space didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt available. I'd started filling it, little by little, with my own things. A small stack of cookbooks I actually liked, a radio that only picked up 2 stations, both of them full of old songs I loved, a bowl of lemons, just because they looked nice in the morning light. That was the biggest change, I think. I started putting beauty where the ache used to live. I didn't do it all at once. Just one corner, then another, a frame there. Not out of some grand need to reinvent myself. Just a quiet reminder that I still had taste, still had preferences, still had a life worth shaping. Lucia noticed first. She came by with a pile of books from her literature class and stopped short in the hallway. "Did you move the chairs?" she asked. I nodded. They never really belonged there. Always too stiff. "It looks better like this," she said. And then, with that soft curiosity I'd come to admire in her, "Do you feel different now?" I didn't answer right away, but later that evening, I thought about it. Did I? Not exactly. The past was still there. The memories didn't vanish. But I felt steadier, like a house that's finally been repaired after years of patchwork. Nothing flashy, just sound, solid, my own. That weekend, I got a letter from Helena. 3 pages, front and back. She wrote about her garden, her neighbor's runaway cat, the book club she'd joined that mostly just drank wine and gossiped. She also wrote this: "I don't know what made you reach out after all this time, but I'm glad you did. We forget we have choices. Then one day, we remember we can call someone who makes us laugh." And just like that, the world gets wider again. I cried reading that. Not from sadness, from recognition. That was the thing, wasn't it? The world was wide, but I had made mine small, trying to stay wanted by people who only saw me when they needed something. Now I was letting it widen again. Lucia and I started walking, in the evenings. Nothing far, just around the block, sometimes to the park. She told me about her friends. A boy she liked who didn't like her back. "Which is fine," she said, "because I don't want to teach someone how to see me." That stopped me in my tracks. I turned and looked at her. Really looked. "You already know that?" I asked. She nodded. "You taught me, and I suppose I had. Not with speeches, not with lectures, but with choices. By saying no when it counted. By choosing peace over performance. By walking away without burning down the house on my way out." That night, I wrote her a new letter. Slipped it under her windshield when she wasn't looking. In it, I wrote, "Strength isn't what people see when you raise your voice. It's what you learn to carry quietly. And more importantly, what you learn to set down." I watched from the window as she found it the next morning. She smiled, didn't even open it right away. Just tucked it into her bag and drove off. She trusted the words could wait. The wildflowers started coming up that week, just small green shoots, brave and messy, with no sense of direction. I bent down, brushed the dirt gently, and smiled. No one told them where to grow. They just decided to, and so had I. This is Marianne, and this is the story of how I found my voice again. Not by shouting, but by finally choosing silence over spectacle. Myself over everyone else's version of who I should be. If you've made it this far, maybe something in this story belongs to you too. Maybe you've been told to be small, to stay grateful, to accept crumbs and call them kindness. Don't. You're not too much. You're just enough for the life that actually fits you. So go plant something wild, say no and mean it, take your seat back. And when the silence finally settles around you, let it remind you. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people. If this story spoke to you, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you.